Welcome back to Bullish on Business. I'm your host, Odette, and today we're diving into one of the most fascinating intersections of finance, immigration, and impact investing. You know, the EB5 Immigrant Investor Program. My guest, Carel Sales Director at EB5 Coast to Coast, one of the largest regional center operators in the United States. They sponsor dozens of EB5 projects, and they're raising over billions of dollars in EB5 capital. Now, Carel comes with a very unique background. He spent 2 decades in global finance and investment, from managing emerging market portfolios in London to working with firms like Morgan Stanley and LCR Capital Partners. But what makes his story stand out to me is that he's an immigrant himself, helping other families achieve the American dream through EB5 investments that also drive real economic and social impact. And that's where I love it, because communities really are improved with these really cool projects that EB5 Coast to Coast is working on. Carel and his team focus on rural and national interest projects, including behavioral health and addiction treatment centers, sectors that the United States government now recognizes as expedited and priority processing. These projects don't just offer a path to residency, they're changing lives on both sides of this investment. What a win-win-win. So whether you're a global investor, an entrepreneur looking for capital, or just someone who wants to understand how this really unique program truly fuels the U.S. economy, this conversation is going to be packed with insight. So let's dive in. How are you doing today, Carel?
I'm great. Thank you, Rose. Thank you very much for hosting me. It's a great pleasure being here.
Well, I'm excited to have you here, Carel. And like we always do on the podcast, we like to get to know the human, the person, before we jump into the business. So could you talk to us a little bit about your story and your background? You've had quite a journey, if you don't mind.
Well, absolutely. Yeah, I was born and raised in South Africa, Cape Town, and I went to university in Cape Town, University of Cape Town, and then, back in late 90s, moved to London, as a lot of South Africans did at the time, just essentially to gain some work experience. I was working in stockbroking at the time and covering emerging markets. So London was sort of the epicenter of the emerging market world at the time from a finance point of view. So it was a great place to be. And a lot of the large South African companies were emigrating out of South Africa to London, to the London Stock Exchange. So it was a great time to be there. And as often happens, we sort of found ourselves, moving there, ending up living there on a more permanent basis, because our kids got born in London, and then we were very settled, really enjoying it. And then my wife got an opportunity to come to the US. And so through her work, so that brought us to the US in 2000. And I managed to get a job in finance in the US as well. And so I was on an H-1B, eventually got my green card, and ultimately citizenship, which took, I think that was about 10+ year journey. But I'm now a US citizen and in the business of advising people how to realize their American dream, moving to the US. So having sort of been through that journey myself, I think it does help. I think you have some sort of sympathy for people, particularly on an H-1B. It is you can feel a little like an indentured worker on an H-1B, because you're very beholden to your employer. And so that anyway, having having some perspective, I think, helps. But
Absolutely. And
I
what a
love.
great background. I mean, you've come from, you've experienced South Africa as that's your home country, leaving there to go to the city and work in the city in London. What a beautiful place. Were you in the Royal, is it called the Royal Exchange?
Yeah, well, well, actually, yeah, the
That building.
London, oh, probably, yes, I can't remember.
I loved it. I
Yeah.
remember I lived there and worked there for 10 years, and we would have meetings in the building, and it was such a buzz in the city there in the stock exchange region, and it does have such a vibe, but it doesn't really match with family. So I can see as you
Okay.
started having children, it probably wore off the sparkle of the city. You probably wanted to experience more homely lifestyle.
Yeah, and I mean, we both, oddly enough, my wife and I were both exchange students to the US when we fresh out of high school. So we both fell in love with America and wanted to get back here, but it's not easy getting into America. So finding a company that's willing to sponsor you is an opportunity you couldn't really turn down. So that's,
Excellent. I
that's
love
what we
that story.
pursued.
And you feel it, and not only you, but your wife as well. So this is truly a family experience. And I know that EB5 does cater to having a family, united family, if you have children under a certain age. So you've worked in the major EB5 firms like LCR Capital Partners and EB5 Marketplace before joining EB5 Coast to Coast. Now, what makes Coast to Coast approach stand out from the others in the industry? What's your competitive edge, if you will, with your regional center?
Yeah, I would say we're the largest sponsor of projects in the market. So the owner of EB5 Coast to Coast is a guy called Steve Smith, and Steve had the foresight several years ago to build up a national portfolio of regional centers. And so he's acquired 14 different regional centers that cover the whole country, coast to coast. And so what we offer is essentially a compliance service to anyone that wants to raise EB5 capital. They have to do it under the auspices of a regional center, and typically a developer that's wanting to raise capital, anywhere in the country doesn't necessarily have a regional center covering that region. So they would then come to us. I mean, one alternative is that they could apply for a regional center through USCIS, but that could take a year and it's going to be very costly to get that approved. So instead, they would come to us and say, look, would you sponsor us? Give us the license to go and raise capital, then you do all the compliance work and you report to USCIS on our behalf in terms of the project progress, job creation, and all of that stuff. So it's a very important role. It's essentially providing oversight across the industry, and that's, I would say, is our our unique strength. We're pretty much the go-to firm out there for sponsorship, and we're currently sponsoring more than 80 projects that are active in the market raising capital. As you pointed out earlier, more than 1,000 investors across these projects. They're looking to raise, probably north of $2 billion in capital. So it's so that's, I would say, our distinct advantage in the industry. We also do raise capital ourselves for some select projects that we currently have, and we can chat a bit about that. But we have focused particularly on rural projects, and as you mentioned, national interest projects as well.
Very cool. Well, can you give us a snapshot of the scale of what you're managing right now? You mentioned the numbers, but can you kind of give us a range?
Yeah, well, I would look at it as twofold. So under the sponsorship program that we run, as I mentioned, we're sponsoring more than 80 projects that have over 1,000 investors, and collectively looking to raise, I think last we checked, it was north of $2 billion. they've probably raised around 700 million to date. And then in terms of our projects that we manage, we currently have 3 projects in the market, one in Colorado, one in California, and one in Hawaii. They're all rural projects. They're all approved. They're all a little unique, like any EB5 project. It's not going to be exactly like another one. They're all a little unique. And yeah, I think collectively among those 3 projects right now, we're looking to raise about $180 million. We've done a number of other projects as well in the past. But I would say in terms of our own projects, we're not in the big league. There are a couple of EB5 firms that have raised several $billion. But we still have an excellent track record in terms of approvals and projects performing, according to expectations.
Fantastic. Well, I think that what we need to focus on is something that we read about and is so excited about. What I'd love to talk to you about is the behavioral health and addiction treatment centers, which qualify for expedited processing under the EB5 Reform and Integrity Act. Why is that sector chosen, and what impact are you seeing on both communities and investors? And I want to say that I actually have my second born son is schizoaffective, and he is always in need of help from behavioral health. So when I saw that he was diagnosed in his early 20s, like so many young men are. And when I saw that you guys are working in that space, it really melted my heart. So I had no idea before I met you and started researching your firm that EB5 investors really sought that out. And it's such a heartwarming aspect of what you guys do. So could you give us a little bit more information about that? Because that's so compelling.
Thank you, Rose. Yes. Well, under the new law, the Reform and Integrity Act, they've taken a slightly different approach to national interest projects. Before the Reform and Integrity Act came into effect, which is in March of 2022, if you had a project that qualified as national interest, you could basically, as you mentioned, all the investors in that particular project would get expedited. And back then we were struggling with very lengthy wait times for particularly Chinese and Indian investors. So multiple year wait times. And so anything that offered a faster track was hugely advantageous. So that was part of our reason back then to focus on national interest projects. Steve has an affinity with the behavioral health industry as well, and he's, over the years developed good relationships and connections in the industry. So we also have, I think, a good inside track into sourcing good deals in the industry. And but under the new law, or really not so new now, but the Reform and Integrity Act, they've slightly changed the approach to national interest projects. And what they now do is they will expedite the project application form. So the project, under the new law, there's a 2-step phase to getting your approval, essentially. The project that you invest in has to be approved. And then secondly, once the project's approved, they'll adjudicate investors in the particular project. So what national interest now offers is a fast track process to get the project approved, but not necessarily the investors. And I think, fortunately, our project, All Points North, is also in a rural area. So under the new law, if you invest into a project that's in a rural location, you also get a fast track, essentially expedited processing. So in a sense, our investors weren't disadvantaged in any way because they benefited from rural. And we got the project application approved in a very quick matter of time. It was 7 weeks, which was very quick. So Having said that, though, I have heard from there are one or two other national interest projects in the market. There's one, for example, in the strategic metals area, which now, obviously, with China putting sanctions on or trade restrictions on strategic metals, this has become very critically important to the government. So they've also got a national interest qualification, and it also happens to be rural. But I've heard that one or two of those investors actually took a lot longer than it should have taken for their approvals. So their attorneys basically filed what's called a mandamus with USCIS and argued that this is a national interest investment. You've got to process this investor, and they were successful. So I do think there is still a benefit to a national interest project from an investor's point of view, although it's not as beneficial as it used to be now that there's a rural qualification you can rely on as well for fast processing. And overlaying all of that, I mean, is the fact that USCIS now has become very efficient at processing, which is an amazing thing to be able to say. But we're seeing across the board much faster processing times for project approvals and for investors. And we're getting for example, in All Points North, our behavioral health project, we're getting the most recent investors were approved in 4 months, which is tremendous. And so, it's very realistic now, I think, that you can file in an EB5 project and expect to get your green card within a year, which is tremendous.
It is amazing. And I think that as things change and evolve, like you've just described, it's so important to have a partner like EB5 Coast to Coast that's keeping an eye on those trends and being the sponsor so that you can alert the projects and the investors if something is changing. And that's why it's so good to have a strong affiliate that works with you that's truly in the know regarding the changes. Because if there's one thing, bureaucracy has a tendency to modify, especially these days. So for listeners who aren't really clear on the rural or the national interest, I think you did a nice job of describing the minerals being a national interest, the behavioral health, I believe, is a national interest. What really, can you think of any other things that might have been in that line? And also, what does the term rural, it means countryside to some people. What does rural mean in the USCIS vernacular mean?
Yes, there's a specific definition for rural, which I'm not going to try and quote out of my head, but it's outside a metropolitan area with a less than 20,000 population, something along those lines. But it's very easy to figure out quickly if your project qualifies for a rural designation or if it's in a high unemployment area, which is the other qualification that qualifies investors for the lower investment threshold, which is currently 800,000. So the best mapping tool out there is if you simply Google IIUSA mapping tool, it'll pop up and you can put in the particular address for any project and it'll tell you it qualifies as either rural or high unemployment or both sometimes or neither. And so that's often, for developers that come to us looking to raise EB5 capital, that's the first thing we ask them. So what's your location? And we'll double check that, because if it doesn't qualify for either of those two, frankly, it's not worth pursuing EB5 capital.
Wow.
So that's a good first step.
Wow, that's really cool. So will you please give me that specific URL so I can put it in the show notes? so that
Yes.
our followers and our audience can definitely do that and quickly find out where the right locations are for an EB5 investment?
Yeah. Do you want me to do that now?
No, no. Well,
Okay.
I'll definitely get that from you. So EB5 Coast to Coast describes itself as guiding investors to make smart, well-informed decisions that lead to both a green card and a solid investment outcome. What due diligence process or investor education model do you use to achieve that?
Well, I think what we're constantly applying our minds to is trying to find the best project out there. And I know a lot of the other EB5 firms are doing exactly the same thing. So it's that's the challenge, really, finding a project that meets, this, the investment criteria back, which is crucial, making sure they're going to get their green card. Those are the two most important criteria. So in terms of projects, ideally, what you're looking for is right now, investors benefit now, investors benefit in a rural project. So we're really looking for rural projects, and that could be. There's a lot of potential options in rural locations. One of our projects, for example, is luxury condominiums in Hawaii, on the island of Kauai, which is, very it's very high end. It's benefits from the fact that it's in a short-term rental area, so there's a lot of demand for these condominiums. But some of the other projects we sponsor could be, it could be a ski resort, it could be an oil and gas project. I mentioned the strategic minerals project. It could be data centers. We're seeing a lot of rural data centers. It could be a boutique hotel somewhere in a rural area. So there's a lot of different types of projects. But I think in terms of what makes it a safe project, we really focus on the capital stack and how the project's going to be financed. Is there going to be, is it fully financed? That's crucial, other than the EB5 component. Or even without EB5, is this project still going to be fully financed? And, in other words, it's going ahead irrespective, because that's crucial. We want to make sure the project gets done so that the jobs are created. But you also want to see a good amount of owner equity in the project. And then, you want to be in the safest position possible as an EB5 investor. So ideally in the senior position. Who's the developer? What's their track record like? That's also crucial. What is the exit strategy here for investors? Are they going to do a refinancing, or are they going to wait for this project to get sold, or what is the strategy around that? So it's a lot of things that go into the mix, but I think that, and that is the challenge, finding the very best project you can, and then helping to structure it, making sure that, from a compliance point of view, there are not going to be any issues, and just making sure that the safeguards are built in for investors as well. So, maybe that would involve negotiating, some sort of guarantees from the developer, personal guarantee, potentially, a project completion guarantee from the construction, and things like that. All those help to ensure that it's going to meet the EB5 requirements.
Well, that certainly sounds extremely comprehensive as far as the due diligence process and how you go about it. It must take a lot of teamwork. Do you have a large team there at EB5 Coast to Coast?
I wish. We don't have a very large team, but we've got an experienced team, I would say. And I mean, to be honest, we've got a good vantage point into the industry because we sponsor so many projects, and so we do have the ability to sort of cherry pick existing projects that are out there, because we know which projects investors are gravitating towards. They have to report all of that to us. And so we can pick projects that we think are attractive and marketable and safe, and we can potentially partner with them to help, with the capital raise. So that's one avenue. The other avenue obviously is finding our own projects. But I think with a small team, you've got to sort of be relatively smart about it. And we've already got access to all of these projects. Why not just team up with a couple that we know are high quality projects and offer those to our investors as well? So that's what we, I think
that speaks volumes. Yeah. It really does. And, from your perspective, you mentioned yourself having an H-1B. There's a lot going on in this whole gold card world these days. What kind of misconceptions do potential investors have now with the EB-5? And how do you help people navigate those fears and misunderstandings? To me, it seems like the H-1B costing now $100,000 fee would push folks possibly to an EB-5, but then the whole gold card thing maybe pushes people away, but then maybe ebbs. And it's just, is there anything that you can help us out with in bringing a little bit of certainty to this time that we live in?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. There's been a lot of discussion around this, and lots of conferences with this, panel discussions discussing this very topic, etc. I mean, my thought is, well, the EB-5 program is not going away. It's certainly not in the near term. The program has to be reauthorized in September 2027. And there's a grandfathering date a year prior to that, September 2026. So effectively, anyone that files prior to that date has to be processed, even if the law lapses. So a lot of investors are fixated on September 26, which is less than a year away. So it's not a lot of time. I do think that the program is going to be reauthorized. There's lobbying has already started, and this time around, EB-5 has got a lot more broader support in Congress because of the fact that, under the rural designation, a lot of investment has flowed into rural states, which in the past never got any EB-5 dollars. But now they're seeing billions of dollars coming into rural states. A lot of them are red states. And job creation is occurring as well. So that's broadened the support for EB-5 in Congress. It doesn't mean it's a slam dunk, but I think, we've had these scares in the past with reauthorization, and it always happened. It's always had bipartisan support. I think you'd be silly to vote against a program that's bringing in billions of dollars, creating tens of thousands of jobs across, most states in the US, and costing zero to the taxpayer. So it's, I mean, the threat to that is, as you pointed out, the gold card. Maybe the gold card could replace it, but that is a tough one for, I think, Congress to swallow, because it doesn't create any jobs in their state. The gold card requires money to go to pay off the federal deficit. I mean, the senator's not going to be wildly excited about that, because there's no benefit to his state paying off the deficit. And investors are not going to be wild about it, because, it doesn't offer them any additional benefit that an EB-5 doesn't, which frankly costs less. And in addition, there's, the visa categories that they've made available for the gold card is EB-1 and EB-2. There are backlogs in those categories for Chinese and Indians. So I think once someone realizes they're going to invest in a gold card for $1 million to pay off the deficit, and now they have to wait for years for their permanent residency, they're not going to go for that. So why not just do an EB-5? You get your money back.
Like a no-brainer.
It's a complete no-brainer. So, Having said that, though, you can't completely discount the Trump administration's determination to push this through. So it is out there as a existential threat to EB5, but I'm not really too concerned. Most people in the industry are not too concerned. But if you're an investor, from a practical point of view, what it means is maybe file your EB5 before September 26, and then you don't have to worry about any of this.
I hear you. I think that's the best advice, Carl.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's talk about families. I love families, and I think most people are super excited about the aspect of the personal aspect. And you've said that helping families achieve their personal American dream gives you the deep personal fulfillment, which is so heartwarming. What's one story or moment that really reminded you of why your work really, really matters?
Well, when I started in EB5, I focused on the South African market because that's where I was from. And I loved that because it took me back to South Africa often, 3-4 times a year, which was a great bonus. And I got many families to invest through EB5, and they have now relocated to the US. And I'm still friends with many of them, and that's very rewarding. So it's changed their lives, and so I just find that tremendously rewarding. It is a life-changing decision, and so very happy with that. And obviously, as a South African, I love helping fellow South Africans as well. So that was an added bonus, but just very rewarding job.
Helping your own countrymen out and country people.
Yeah.
That's really, really heart-touching. So I really appreciated you today, Carl. Are there any final things that you'd like to share with our audience before we close out our talk today?
That's been wonderful chatting to you, Rose. I would just say, best advice, honestly, if you're going to do an EB5, is sooner the better. There are potential backlogs looming for rural and high unemployment, but I don't think it's anytime soon. But obviously, if you're going to do this, there's a benefit to getting in the queue sooner rather than later. It's working really well right now. Approval times are very quick, and success rate is very high. The overall industry success rate, approval rate for EB5 is in the high 90s, 95, 96%. So you're very likely to get your green card and get it within a year. And I think that's a tremendous opportunity.
That's a great opportunity, a wonderful way to wrap this one up, Carl. And thank you so much. And I was wondering if in maybe 12 to 18 months, and we see how the world has changed and moved on, I may have you back. Is that something you could do maybe?
Of course, I'd love to.
That would be fantastic. Well, everyone out there, I just want you to share this with your colleagues, especially investors or people who have projects, and definitely keep EB5 Coast to Coast on your radar, because they're definitely the place to watch. And so with that, we'll see you next time. Don't forget, like, share, and subscribe, and see you next time. Bye.